Hello, I'm Leroy Garcia, and this is Blue Rain Gallery Podcast. Today, we are doing something really special. We are at the home of Marigold Linton, who's an extraordinary person. I think people should get to know better. She's a longtime collector of contemporary Native American art, among many other things. Welcome to the podcast, Marigold.
Thank you very much.
I would like to start by having you describe a little bit about where you came from, where you were raised, the influence of that, and then about your professional career before we start talking about some art.
Okay, great.
So let us have it.
Okay, I was born on the Morongo Reservation in Southern California. My father's people are the Kuya Kupeño. My mother is, in quotes, a white woman of Japanese and German descent, which made us all very unpopular, even on the reservation during the war years. But my younger brother and I never got picked on. My older brother always did, which was sort of silly because he was big, and my little brother and I were rather small. But we were forced to sort of stand between him and his persecutors because he wasn't very good at defending himself. We took the reservation. We did not go to school on the reservation because they had closed the Indian schools 10 years before I was born.
And what years were these around?
They were around until about 1943. My father and his sisters and my grandparents all went to Indian schools. But fortunately, they were closed by the time we got there, and so we were able to go to the Banning public schools. But we always came in on the reservation bus, so everybody knew we were Indians. My mother took us to school the first day of every year. She took us to school and dropped us off, and I sat there at the edge of the fenced-in area for the school, screaming and crying every year until I was about in 6th grade. So now, I was treated very well in school. At the time, they had the robins and the bluebirds and the canaries, and all the little smart white kids were in the robins, and this one little Indian was in with the robins too, and all the other little Indians were in with the canaries down at the bottom of the heap. This, over time, meant that I wasn't very well accepted by my Indian friends because who wants a little smartass? I mean, it was never the case that I bragged about that. I wasn't that stupid. But just the fact that I was enough to make them very unhappy with me.
So you're a little bit ostracized?
Not ostracized so much as ignored. And it was interesting because I had a first cousin who lived in town. Now, she had nothing to do with any of the Indian kids, and she got along just fine with the non-Indians. But she was blue-eyed and blonde. And I wasn't. So I was clearly not one of the little blue-eyed blonde persons. Of course, having gray hair now is really nice because I finally am a blonde.
That's funny. Tell me a little bit, like, what was it like growing on the res? Well, like, what amenities did you not have compared to what you have today?
Oh, the amenities I have today are just amazing, of course, because I live on a lovely golf course. Mm-hmm. I have 6 bathrooms in the house at one place or another, many bedrooms. And as a kid, we had the kitchen, which was heated by a wood stove. And we had, I always say we didn't have water. We did actually have running water into the kitchen. So we had no toilets because we didn't have water. And you couldn't have had a toilet because if you have a cistern, you have to fill the cistern every time it empties, and it's very difficult. It was very difficult under the conditions at the time to get water because you got it once every 4 or 5 weeks, and you had to fill your cistern and irrigate your entire yard and crops and everything.
I was listening to an interview that you gave a few years back, and you were talking about that and your first experience with contemporary Americana in the flesh, and you're like, "What's up with all the water?" Right? Is that what you said?
Yeah. Well, I mean, so when I went to college, my mother found a little place with a friend, and they had flushing toilets. And it wasn't that I had ever flushed a toilet before, but I didn't have any of the ethos of flushing toilets. I mean, I didn't know you surely did not pee and then flush, because that would be so wasteful of water. Mm-hmm. Now, if you pooed, then you would have to use water, but it did not make any sense to waste all that water. But anyway,
I think that's an important observation, though, isn't it? Because your natives are really tied to the environment, and water is a very big part of life, and a lot of imagery from the Native American community is about water.
Well, but what's really interesting is because during the war, people didn't like my mother because she was the wrong nationalities. And so people would put dead rabbits in our cistern where we held the water. It wasn't covered. We couldn't afford to cover it, and they would have gotten it in anyway if they'd wanted to. So who had to go get the rabbit out of the cistern? This little midgety girl, because you'll get it out nice and cleanly. Your brothers won't do it right.
Right.
So I always had to walk the half a mile to the cistern and get the rabbit out.
Clean it up. Oh.
Yeah.
Oh man, the journeys.
But then I would take the rabbit home with me because the dogs would eat it.
Oh.
I mean, they were very happy to have
a nice fresh rabbit.
or
a little bit.
Slightly stale rabbit.
That is funny. So let's talk about your journey into academia, coming from the res, and let's talk about a little bit of your accomplishments.
Well, I got accepted at UC Riverside. It turns out that as a child, my mother had worked in Riverside, and she had, we had driven home every day past the citrus experiment station. And I thought it was a college. It was beautiful. And I said, that's where I want to go to college. That's a beautiful place. I want to go to college there. And by a miracle, the year that I was ready to go to college, they put UC Riverside, University of California, Riverside, at that location. So the citrus experiment station wasn't part of it, but it was the thing I knew. They had, at the time, had 5 buildings on the campus. We just had our 65th reunion.
Wow.
And it is hard to find those 5 buildings among the
trees and all the other buildings over there.
Thousands of buildings by this time. But so my mother found a place for me to live, and there was a bus, but I had never caught a bus, and I didn't know how to catch a bus. And the area was the place where they also picked up the people for the March there was a bus that came by and picked up the March airfield soldiers returning to camp. But I couldn't tell the buses apart and had no idea what they were. So I
had to figure that out.
Well, so I stood on the corner and the bus ignored me. So I walked to school the first 5 or 6 days. And then, interestingly, so I'm living in relative splendor in this house that has a bathroom.
Running water.
And one of my classmates was living in an orange tree nearby. So
wow,
he was poorer than I mean, because at least I had. And why was I able to go to college? Because when in 8th grade, I had a teacher, Mrs. Adams, who came out to the reservation. And I like to say her name because I have this sort of primitive belief that if I say her name, she is momentarily alive again.
And make her relevant.
Yeah.
Right?
So she came out, and she's the only teacher who ever came to the reservation for any occasion. And she said, "Mrs. Linton, your daughter is very, very smart, and you should make sure that she goes to college." And my mother never said anything about that. My mother isn't feeble-minded. She's very bright. So I assume she remembered it, but she didn't say, "Remember, you should go to college." She never mentioned it at all, ever. But the next day, I started saving money to go to college. And what I did is had a piggy bank in which I put half of everything I earned that was given to me. Like I got $5 for a birthday present, $2.50 went into it. I worked cutting cardboard boxes. We'd cut cardboard boxes, then we'd cut the cardboard boxes into 8x10, 5x7, 9x12, all the sizes of traditional film. And I got paid about a penny or two a piece for each of these pieces of, so I made maybe $5 in a week doing this. Half of it went into my
$2.50.
And the rest of it went for candy.
Nice.
Other good stuff. But at any rate, I'm now.
Oh, that's the famous clock.
Every hour on the hour.
Oh, I love that clock too. Marigold has this clock, and it has rotating numbers around it until the chime stops, and then it realigns into a perfect north 12, south 6, east west is perfect. So we'll just let that ring. It's nice. Till it aligns. Okay.
So now so I'm trying to catch a bus, can't catch the bus in Riverside, and walk. And I walk the first day, I walk the second day, I walk the third day. And the fourth day, as I'm coming out.
So is this walk miles or?
It was probably a little over a mile.
Yeah.
I mean, it wasn't a big deal.
Right.
But it was.
It's still a walk.
I was not fresh and dainty when I arrived. So, but about the fourth day, when I come out and I'm walking home, I see a bus at the corner, and I see other kids getting on the bus. So I run over and I give them my nickel, and I hop on the bus. And of course, I figured that I wouldn't have to walk more than a mile from wherever it stopped. And I saw people pulling the little chain, so I knew how to do that. But it was totally alien to me that I should inconvenience all these people
For your stop.
for my stop.
Mhm.
So, so you're there, you're now 3 stops before your place. Is that the best you're going to do? 2 stops before your place. Will somebody actually pull it where you are? Are you going to have to go 3 stops after you? So if somebody pulled it, I hopped off 2 stops before and walked. And this went on for a long time before I finally was able to bring myself to
pull that chain.
pull the little string. But I mean, so it was a major triumph to be able to figure out how to get on the bus, get taken there for my nickel, get brought back for my nickel. And I don't know whether I finished my sentence about saving money. I had saved $1,000.
Wow. From the box cutting.
From the box cutting and half of everything I got. So all the gifts, all the, whatever I could. I sold some chickens. I raised some chickens. I sold some chickens. That made me probably $1 after all these.
Isn't that amazing? I mean, we're thinking about today, we're all suffering, but and I kind of grew up that way, so I understand exactly what you're saying.
Did you grow up with those kinds of attitudes?
No, not as much. You have great attitudes.
So, at any rate, in college, I had left out the place where when I told all my high school classmates I was going to college, despite the fact that I was a straight-A student in high school, my little white friends all said, "You can't go to college. You're an Indian. You'll just flunk out." Okay, so I had saved $1,000 to do this. I believed them that I was going to flunk out, but
You went for it anyways.
Yeah, you say, I have to go.
Yes.
I mean, I saved my money all these years. I'm certainly going to go to college. So I go to college, and I'm in all the required classes, and I do, pretty well on the tests, but I don't have any idea what this all means. And so they send me my grades at the end of the semester, and I look at it, and they're all A's. And since I was going to flunk out, I could not, it was impossible that these should be my grades. They had to be somebody else. So I took them, and the only time this ever has happened in history, I took them to the registrar and said, "These are very nice grades, but they can't be mine. So you should give them to whoever they belong to and give me mine." And they said, "Come on, kid, we don't make that kind of mistake. Those are your grades. Be grateful and go away." So I took them, but I believed it was a mistake because I knew I was going to flunk out. So I worked my buns off the next semester, once again got straight A's, and wasn't stupid enough to go back and
to the register and say, "You made a mistake."
You made another mistake. And so I figured, well, I had now straight A's twice. That was pretty good. But when they called on me in class, I would start crying and run out of the room.
Were you shy, or?
I was unable to talk in public, and that seemed to me very public to me.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it was just, I just couldn't do it.
Yeah.
And so
I know somebody like that. Sitting right over there.
Oh, so she would sympathize.
Yes. Well, look at the smile.
Oh, well, we're all little bits and pieces of each other, aren't we?
I was referring to my beautiful wife. She's the same way.
So at any rate, the next semester I got straight A's the following semester. Now, you notice I don't talk a lot about all the friends I made
Yeah.
because
You didn't have time for friends because you're studying? That's why.
I was working, and I mean, I wasn't working, but the second year I had to start working. Oh, and I started working in the barn, which still is there, which we still walk through on my 65th reunion. So it's still beautiful. But I worked there for a semester, and they terminated me. They didn't fire me, they terminated me because I couldn't call out the orders. So somebody would say, I'd like French fries and a hamburger. And so I would go running over to, and I'd say, he wants French fries and a hamburger. And I was supposed to say, he wants French fries and a hamburger.
You're supposed to yell it out.
Yeah, and I absolutely couldn't do it. So they found me a job in a nice, quiet job in the photographer studio.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the photographer was in his late 20s. I was 19 at this time. And he thought I was beautiful. And he had me in all of his pictures. So
you're a model and you didn't know it.
Yeah. And so he needed, they had to put up a new building, and I am photographed on it in my beautiful little 19-year-old outfit. And
mm-hmm. Well, you showed us a few pictures of your youth, and yeah, you're very beautiful.
more so in the day, but so I worked after that. I worked for the remaining years I was in college, but I worked half-time during the school year and full-time during the summer. And I worked full-time I worked half-time during summer too, because there was another person who worked. And then one year he couldn't come back. He was graduated or whatever. And I said, you ought to hire my mother.
Because she's a photographer too, right?
She's a photographer, but she's a photo finisher. She was a professional photo finisher in the last year.
And by that, do you mean like a professional developer, or what do you mean?
Yes. In the day, you had to every picture had to be, you had to look at the negative and that was what I was doing. You had to look at the negative. You had to decide how many seconds you exposed it. Then you had to put it in a bath, and you then waited until it had matured, and then you put it in the deck towel, and then you put it in the rinse, and that fixed and a fixative. And so that was
right.
And she knew how to do all of this. And my boss said, your mother, why would I said, she's so good. She is so good. I mean, you will just be amazed. Much better than any of these little kids that you have to bring in and train up. So hire my mother. He said, okay. And so he hired my mother. And they did not get along at all, but she worked for them for 40 years.
For that long?
Well, not 40. She was at 40, and she'd retired at 65.
So she had a longevity there.
Yes.
As a career.
As a career. And all the time she was fighting with Ken Middleham, but because...
Well, they must have respected her.
Well,
right?
Oh, and what was interesting is they actually promoted her, gave her a higher salary, because she had powerful friends on campus who said, you will raise her salary. So she had a retirement, which most women who spend their life on a reservation did not have.
Right.
And she never really liked me, which is always sort of hard. I was very fond of my mother. I loved my mother a lot and did all these things that I could. But my mother liked my younger brother and did not like me very much. So I think she because she thought I was too smart,
Hmm.
you know.
Well, you're going through the same problem you've always had, right, in life. So tell me about your career trajectory. When did you decide to do what you're going to do?
Well, I've gotten my BA, and so what I had no idea what the options were. I mean, as far as I was concerned, I wasn't going to go and be a secretary, which is what I did in a lot of my summer. But I did not like being a secretary, and I had no idea what other kind of jobs there were. So I applied for graduate school, and I was going to go to UCLA, but at any rate, there was a male I was trying to avoid. Yes, and so I went to Iowa, and he came with me.
You can run, but you can't hide.
Yeah, apparently. So, any rate, so he's there in the background for 7 years, but not ever important to me.
So what were you studying in graduate school? What was your emphasis? What did you decide to go?
I was a psychology major in high school when they told me that if I went into political science, which I wanted to, that the women weren't very nicely treated in poli-sci.
Mm-hmm.
So I said,
It was a male-dominant field at that point.
male dominant and male abusive, apparently. So I went into psychology, where all you had to do is keep your butt out of their pinchy little fingers, which is easier. So I got my first So I went to graduate school at the University of Iowa, and then transferred to UCLA, where I got my Ph.D. in experimental cognitive psychology. And then,
was this a first for a person from the res?
well, going to college, I was the first California Indian from any reservation to ever go to college.
Wow.
So there are, 19 or 29? They're large number of reservations, but I was the first one to ever go to college. Oh, it's very amusing because having seen that, you don't have to listen to your white friends saying you're an Indian, you'll just flunk out. Everybody started coming from the reservations and going to Riverside and going into psychology because the model had gone into, they said,
the trailblazer, right? So one of the reasons we're here, Marigold, talking to you, is that Blue Rain has always recognized pioneers, innovators, and you're a pioneer to your community and other Native American communities. It's important to hear this story and the challenges that you had to endure, the biases coming from zero, making yourself from zero into something wonderful and beautiful, which you probably always felt within, but everybody around you, it's hard. But
what's interesting is I believed everybody who told me you couldn't succeed.
mm-hmm.
It's just that I didn't see the promise of failure as any reason to keep me from going ahead.
Yeah, I think that's a beautiful thing. I also find what's interesting in your story with your mom and yourself in photography, getting a little bit of knowledge of artistry, right? You're starting to pay attention to things like even in the processing of film, the development. How light does this get? How dark does this get? Finding balance in the construct. How did that influence the rest of your life after your professional career and you started collecting art?
Well, actually, I started collecting art when I was 18 years old. The first thing I ever bought was a not very good piece, which I may or may not still have, for $100, which was a lot of money in the day.
Mm-hmm.
But the minute that I had any money at all, I bought art. And some of the earliest stuff is not, well, it was what I could afford, and a lot of it wasn't stuff that I.
Your journey parallels a normal person because when we get into art, we're all like that. We buy things we can afford that inspire us. And then as we get more accomplished, we're like, oh, I'm gonna save up for that one. um, Going through Marigold and Robert, her husband's house here in Scottsdale, it is filled with beautiful art that has been collected for over many years. Marigold has showed me a collection of baskets. She has uh, beautiful Edward Curtis prints, Northwest Coast, Navajo. Uh, what do you like about art that you collected so much?
It just speaks to me. I mean, and at first it spoke to me, and I couldn't afford very much. But now that I am fairly comfortably off, it speaks to me. And people say, why do you keep buying? You don't have any room. You have your archives full. You have both of your abodes full. Why do you keep buying? And it's really because the artists still need the money. and
Well, that is true.
and my family were starving artists.
Mhm.
So they were very talented, and I had none of the talent. But as everybody said, you obviously got the eye, because I have very good judgment about.
You do. You have your collection's fantastic. So you have a collection of a family of painters from Santa Clara Pueblo. And tell us a little bit about that. What do you like about Pablito Velarde, Helen Hardin, and Margaret Tyndall?
I love the stuff because it's vivid, interesting, clear, and distinct. You'll notice one thing about my collection is I have virtually nothing that's blurry or.
Yeah, it's very distinct lines and color.
Very few. If you look right behind you, you'll see something that's slightly abstract.
Yeah.
But it's not terribly abstract.
There's still distinct lines.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah. And
Um,
I every time, when Blue Rain sends me a set of pictures.
We're always torturing you.
No, when they're abstract, I say, yuck, and move on. When they're not abstract. So.
Yeah, recently I've noticed you started collecting a little bit of Robin Jones.
Yes.
What do you like about her stuff?
I love the fact that she's inexpensive.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, she is so underpriced for the quality of that work. I mean, I think her work is just amazing. Yes. And it's very inexpensive. So you say, even if I don't love that as much as I might love other things in my collection, what else in my collection is that cheap?
Mm-hmm.
So I bought the first two because they were so inexpensive. And then the third one, that little girl.
Oh, yeah, that's a beautiful piece.
It's just marvelous. I love it.
Mm-hmm.
And
I met her. She's a beautiful soul like you. And I think next time you come to Santa Fe, we need to get you guys together.
Great.
You'll really like that. I also Marigold showed us. Obviously, I talked a little bit about the baskets, but she has a little case going towards the kitchen here, full of cachinas and pottery. And there's the section of pottery in the case that's Margaret and Luther Guterres from Santa Clara Pueblo. Tell us a little bit of story about that, how you got started on that.
Well, that was really funny. And I have told you the story, but I will tell our audience. So I lived in Salt Lake at this time. It was before Bob and I had met or gotten married. And so the University of Utah paid me very handsomely. I mean, it's nothing in today's salaries, but it was very high salary in academic salaries at the time. So anyway, so I go to Santa Fe and Albuquerque, Santa Fe, and there are these absolutely fabulous pots. I think they were actually in Albuquerque at the time. And they were just beautiful, but they cost $100 a piece. And I could not possibly have afforded something that cost $100 a piece. So the second year I go back, and they're more beautiful pots, and they cost $200 a piece. And I say, ooh, I'll never be able to afford these. And
I know the feeling.
painful, isn't it?
It is.
And so the third year I go back, and they're $300 a piece. And I say, I've got to buy them now, or I'll never be able to get any of these.
You won't catch up.
No. So I put a down payment on 3 of them and paid what I had, paid the minimum every period, whatever they asked for. And then finally, after about 5 years, they said, when are you ever going to pick these up? So I paid it off and took them home.
Well, they're very beautiful. I'm glad you did that. But
Yeah,
one of my favorite painters is Nikolai Fechin. And I keep trying to save money, but every time something comes up to auction, it's like 2 or 3 times more. I can't catch up. So you were smart back then to do that. But a beautiful collection. And but Marigold, you're also a very beautiful person. And thank you for taking time with us today, talking a little bit about your art, your career, your heritage, your journey. It's a beautiful story.
Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah. I'd like to encourage our audience to subscribe to Blue Rain Gallery Podcast on any of the platforms, our YouTube channel, or go to blueraingallery.com under our podcast bar. Also, we'd like to encourage you to take art with you into your everyday life by going to bluerainprintshop.com. Thanks. Thank you, Marigold.
Thank you.